Hey folks, in this video, I'm going to be walking you through some old heirloom traditional flowers, bushes, shrubs that you can grow on your land this year. For me, the after Christmas months, the deep winter months of January and February, that is when I take my time flipping through seed catalogs and I plan out my gardens for the following year. A lot of what I plan for are vegetables for my vegetable garden, but now that my man and I are finally settled on our own piece of land, I am also very interested in establishing perennial flowering plants around the property. One of the places I like to go to gather inspiration for traditional perennial flowers is actually the Anne of Green Gables series written by Lily Maid Montgomery. There are some beautiful descriptions and actually some very detailed lists of flowers throughout that book. If you read with ears and eyes for discovering flower varieties, there are some wonderful ideas within the pages of the book. So I've been going there lately to get my inspiration, and I thought you might like to come along and just get some ideas for perennial flowers, shrubs, and even bushes and vines actually that you can set up and establish on your property that will return for you year after year. So let me take you with me, and we are going to go take a look at some of the flowers mentioned in Anne of Green Gables. One of the first sort of annual plants, domestic plants that we hear mention of in the book Anne of Green Gables, apart from fruit trees and of course some wild plants, is actually lilacs. Lilacs are a very traditional, very hardy shrub that puts out beautiful flowers, and it was actually very common on old homesteads. So let me read to you from pages 30 and 31 from the book Anne of Green Gables. On both sides of the house was a big orchard, one of apple blossoms and one of cherry trees, also showered over with blossoms, and their grass was all sprinkled with dandelions. In the garden below were lilac trees, purple with flowers, and their dizzily sweet fragrance drifted up to the window on the morning wind. If you are looking for a beautiful flowering perennial that you can put in that will be there for years to come, lilacs are a wonderful option. And that is actually, before we even started building our home here, I actually planted several lilac bushes by just taking shoots, spring shoots from a friend's plant. So if you want to learn how to do that, I'll put a link down below. I have a blog post on how you can take suckers from lilacs, at least if they are the type that has lots of smaller canes. If it's a tree type, that won't work as well, but if you have sort of the suckering cane lilac variety, that's a great way to get your hands on some beautiful lilacs for free. The second perennial flowering plant we hear about in Anne of Green Gables comes when Anne goes to apologize to Mrs. Rachel Lynde. So let me read that excerpt to you here. "Run along, child," said Mrs. Rachel Lynde, "and you can pick a bouquet of them white June lilies over in the corner if you like." And then later, when Marilla went home, Anne came out of the fragrant twilight of the orchard with a sheath of white narcissi in her hands. "I apologized pretty well, didn't I?" she said proudly as they went down the lane. "I thought since I had to do it, I might as well do it thoroughly." "You did it thoroughly, all right enough," was Marilla's comment. And Marilla was dismayed at finding herself inclined to laugh over the recollection. I love that part. So, in Avonlea, apparently, white narcissi, which is actually a type of daffodil, was apparently quite commonly grown there. It's grown from bulbs, and it's something that if you want to grow it, you would want to plant it in the fall because they would come up in the spring, or depending on the variety, some you may be able to plant very early in the spring, but white narcissi is another beautiful flowering plant that you can put in once and it will come back year after year. Lily Maid Montgomery obviously had a deep love for flowers because all throughout her series on Anne Shirley, we hear beautiful descriptions of flowers. And if you are looking for, perennial traditional flowers to put in on your land, if you will have an area that is partial shade, you need to sit up and take note of her description of the berries garden. Let me read this to you from page 86 and 87. When Anne and Diana meet for the first time, the ladies shoo them outside into the garden. And here is Lucy Maud Montgomery's description of a garden with flowers that like partial shade. The garden was encircled by huge old willows and tall firs, beneath which flourished flowers that loved the shade. Prim, right-angle paths, neatly bordered with clamshells, intersected it like moist red ribbons, and in the beds between, old-fashioned flowers ran riot. I'm just going to read off some of them for you here. There were rosy bleeding hearts and great splendid crimson peonies, white fragrant narcissi, thorny sweet Scotch rose, pink and blue and white columbines, and lilac-tinted bouncing bets. There was purple Adam and Eve, daffodils, and masses of sweet clover, scarlet lightning that shot its fiery lances over prim white musk flowers. A garden it was where sunshine lingered and bees hummed, and the winds, beguiled into loitering, purred and rustled. So apparently, Mrs. Barry had a huge, beautiful garden, but because it was surrounded by trees, she had to plant flowers, perennial flowers under it that loved the shade. And that's an incredible list right there. I have taken note of it more than once for planting flowers on the east side of our home, where it really only gets morning sunshine and then is shaded the rest of the day. So that's a wonderful resource for the east side of your home, or if you have an area that is partially shaded. I love the variety of plants that are mentioned in the book Anne of Green Gables. From, little woodland flowers to the domestic flowers that farmers' wives planted around their home, to shrubs, and we even have mention of some vines as well. So one of the ones we hear of is Virginia creeper. Mrs. Barry grew it along her house, had it climbing up onto her house. And so we know from Anne's accident when she walks the ridgepole of the Barry's roof that she destroyed Mrs. Barry's Virginia creeper. So let me just read real quick here. We have two references to it. Page 185. Nevertheless, she managed to take several steps before the catastrophe came. Then she swayed, lost her balance, stumbled, staggered, and fell, sliding down over the sun-baked roof and crashing off it through the tangle of Virginia creeper beneath, all before the dismayed circle below could give a simultaneous, terrified shriek. They found Anne lying all white and limp among the wreck and ruin of the Virginia creeper. So apparently, Virginia creeper was something Mrs. Barry loved having climbing up her home. And we don't know if it was to shade the certain windows from the sun in the summer, or if it was the fact that she loved the foliage. Virginia creeper does have beautiful leaves, but what it's especially noted for is in the fall, the leaves turn a really beautiful, vibrant orange-red color, and that is likely why it has stayed around as a beautiful ornamental plant. Not only is it a vigorous grower, but it's also so pretty in those fall months. Do you remember the story of the Lily Maid? When Anne floats down in Mr. Barry's boat, sinks it, and gets stuck on the pilings under the bridge? Yes, we even have an insight into flowers here. Two types of flowers, actually, that must have been commonly grown in Avonlea and that were both perennials. A white lily was not to be obtained just then, but the effect of a tall blue iris placed in one of Anne's folded hands was all that could be desired. Now, she's all ready, said Jane. We must kiss her quiet brows, and Diana, you say, sister, farewell forever, and Ruby, you say, farewell, sweet sister, both of you as sorrowfully as you possibly can. So apparently whenever the girls did this, the white lilies that apparently were commonly grown were out of season, so instead they went for an iris. So it's fair to assume that both white lilies and also irises were commonly grown in PEI in the mid to late 1800s. We hear mention of lilies a little bit later as Anne is getting ready to go recite at the White Sands Hotel at page 266 of the book. They're giving a description of her room and how it had changed. Tonight, a spike of white lilies faintly perfumed the room like the dream of a fragrance. There was no mahogany furniture, but there was a white painted bookcase filled with books, a cushioned wicker rocker, a toilet table befrilled with white muslin, and a quaint gilt-framed mirror. So I think it's fair to assume we have two mentions of real lilies, not Mrs. Rachel Lynde's June lilies, which were actually narcissus. Lilies are actually a wonderful perennial plant. You can usually plant them in the spring and they will bloom for you later in the summer, or some people like to plant the bulbs in the fall. But that is a really beautiful, fragrant flower that is a perennial that you can plant in your flower gardens. One particular perennial flower that probably appears more than any others in the entire series, Anne of Green Gables, is actually roses. So we know that roses are mentioned in several different gardens throughout the series, and specifically in Anne of Green Gables, we have numerous mentions of roses grown outdoors in gardens. We hear about house roses as well, both Diana and Marilla. They talk about their house roses. And then we also know that Matthew Cuthbert had a favorite rose that actually his mother had brought over from Scotland when she came. So let me read this to you. This is after Matthew has actually died and is going to plant a Scotch rose on his grave. So this is from page 298. I was down to the graveyard to plant a rose bush on Matthew's grave this afternoon, said Anne dreamily. I took a slip of the little white Scotch rose bush his mother brought out from Scotland long ago. Matthew always liked those roses the best. They were so small and sweet on their thorny stems. It made me feel glad I could plant it by his grave, as if I were doing something that must please him and taking it there to be near him. So here's the neat thing about roses. Women longer ago, they knew how to propagate roses from cuttings. So they didn't so much grow them from seed, but we know from this story and this little excerpt in particular that Anne knew how to take cuts from rose bushes, reroot them, and then grow more bushes. And Scotch roses are actually a very fascinating flower. To me, it's actually something I would like to grow here. They're wonderful for hedgerows because they put out lots of suckers. And so the Scotch rose is something that's not as common today, but roses are. So if you're looking to put in perennials, you can take cuts from a friend and properly learn how to reroot them so you can grow them from cuttings, which I will leave a link below to a wonderful tutorial. It's not mine, but a tutorial where somebody walks you through how to do that, when to do it, all the details you need to know there. But if you don't want to bother with that, if you would like to just go buy some rose bushes, your local nursery is a wonderful place to go. Roses are quite hardy perennials and they're beautiful. So I would highly recommend putting in some roses if you are looking for perennial flowers to establish in your flower beds. The last perennial that we hear mention of in Anne of Green Gables is actually another climbing vine. So this grew apparently right outside the door at Green Gables. So let me read this to you from page 298. Anne gathered some sprays of pale yellow honeysuckle and put them in her hair. She liked the delicious hint of fragrance, as of some aerial benediction above her every time she moved. So we know that around Green Gables, honeysuckle vines were something that was grown. Honeysuckle is a beautiful climbing vine, and unlike Virginia creeper, it puts out beautiful, delicious smelling blossoms. I am a huge fan of honeysuckle. We don't have any going here yet, but you can get it in white, in yellow, pink, orange. So that would be a wonderful plant to look at, especially if you have an arbor or an archway on your property. The hummingbirds will love honeysuckle, and that's a wonderful one to go for as well if you're looking for perennials to put in around your home. One of the things I really love about old books like Green Gables is the insights they give into perennial flowers. Lots of our seed catalogs today, our flowers are hybrids, meaning they don't necessarily reproduce blossoms true to color, type, or shape. Or sometimes they don't self-seed. Often they won't survive my cold Canadian winters here. So I love going back to some of these books and then looking for what did they grow, and then what can I find that is either an heirloom of that flower variety or an open pollinated variety so that it will reproduce true to type. Farmers' wives back in the mid to late 1800s didn't have time to mess with seeding out annuals every year and creating, all the landscaping around their home. So I love looking to them for their knowledge that they had back in the day on which plants would return year after year, which ones where the roots would survive, and which ones would self-seed. So I hope that gave you some ideas and some inspiration. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. My name is Autumn Rose. I'm the blogger at atraditionallife.com. I'm so glad you stopped by, and hopefully you can have some fun planting your flower gardens this year.